Howdy, Sandy Sheriff here with another episode of Sacrilegious Sunday. And if you hadn't noticed, I'm doing captions for this particular video simply because I'm pretty sure the concept for this video is going to make signing a little bit complicated. So this week's video is themed around LGBTQ and however many other letters and numbers go into that, I honestly don't know. Whenever I first heard and learned what the concept was, I actually just called it LG. The only problem is that LG is a phone brand. So that doesn't work. But anyway, so LG was what it was called whenever I was first hearing about it. I was oblivious to what it meant at the time, but then again, I was also oblivious to what an LG phone was. So take for what it's worth. So for the purposes of this video, instead of saying LGBTQ, I'm going to attempt to say queer, but I'll probably end up accidentally forgetting and saying LGBTQ because I can clearly say that a little bit faster. So it just depends on what's going on at the time. So you probably already figured out, because Sacrilegious Sunday follows the same type of pattern by accident. So I'm going to attempt to explain what the Bible actually says in reference to LGBTQ or queer people and relationships, physical or non-physical, by the way. So, and as you probably have already noticed, because there's this very conspicuous shoulder over here, Cass is, for some reason, kind of attempting to hide over there, which I don't know how that works because you can see his shoulder. Anyway. Oh, lovely. So, Cass, first question I want to ask you. I'm going to lean over because Cass might end up trying to lean into the frame. I'm asking Cass this in as if he were a person who has the standard generic belief system of not necessarily a Christian, but an average Joe out and about.
But I'm not I am an average Joe, but I'm part of the queer community, so...
Yeah, so I'm basically what I'm trying to get you to do is just go from what you would think any average person would probably answer.
The average person should be accepting.
I'm not saying what they should be. I'm saying what they probably will say. So, for example, the question I was about to ask was, what do you think the majority of people believe that the Bible says about queer relationships, just in general?
Oh, that I know what the Bible says about that.
But what do you think the average Joe would probably answer to that?
That it's a sin.
Yeah, so most people would automatically say it's a sin. Now, this one I actually do not know. That one I knew what the answer was. This one I don't know what the answer is. Do most people usually specify any details about why they say the answer is no? Or do they usually just say the answer is no blanketly?
I know it's an abomination because God said so.
So I'm guessing most people probably don't know the Bible says it's an abomination, so they would probably be going from just a generic blanket idea. So I'm assuming that most people just believe it's a sin, and even they don't even know why, would be my guess. So now let's try and see if we can break down a little bit as to why exactly is it a sin. So first of all, in order to figure out the answer to that, oh my goodness, that was a chore. In order to figure out why it's a sin, we have to know why. Okay, actually, you know what? Let me explain that part later on. So the Bible says, and I believe Leviticus, possibly Deuteronomy, the Bible explains that man shall not lie with mankind as with womankind. I have a few problems with that particular statement. For example, that verse specifies that the Bible is capable of referring to the human race with gender specific while being gender specific. But that's the only concept where men versus women is specified. Okay, that's a little weird. So I'm trying to be YouTube friendly when I say this. The phrase lie with is doesn't mean the phrase lie with doesn't mean lie down on a bed, lie down on a bed. It means the physical side to the relationship, if you know what I mean. So, in every situation that the Bible talks about this, that is what's called an abomination. Okay. Now, here's the thing that annoys the snot out of me quite frequently, honestly. And I'm going to hopefully get Cass involved here. So, baby.
What?
Did you notice the problem, which I'm pretty sure I brought this up to Cass before, so he might remember what I'm about to talk about here. Do you see what the problem is with the concept of man shall not lie with mankind as with womankind? It is abomination.
Stupid.
Well, ignoring that.
You can't control it because it's free will. I don't know.
I mean, that's also true. But Christians seem to have this consistent problem with extrapolation. Do you get where I'm going with it now? It's like, for example, one verse, possibly 1.5 verse, but something like that, made Christians extrapolate the concept that Satan is all evil and God is all good. The Bible never point blank says that, so they extrapolate that from different passages. So Christians are, across the board, pretty consistent about extrapolating concepts from things that kind of say that, but realistically, they don't really say that. So, like, for example, in this particular context, the verse says, mankind shall not lie with mankind as with womankind, talking about a physical relationship. Okay. What does that mean in reference to a non-physical relationship?
I don't know.
Well, to understand that, and I'm coming back around to this because I started mentioning it earlier and it wasn't a good time for it yet. Why does God call a man being with a man physically an abomination? Because in another passage he refers to it as confusion. That's one of the few things the Bible says about this that I can actually agree with. It does kind of get a little bit confusing. Now, here's the thing. Sexuality is not really that confusing. I can grasp sexuality without too much problem. Gender identity can sometimes be a little bit confusing. But sexuality, like for example, if Cass identifies as a man. But let's use a hypothetical situation for a second here. Let's say that Cass identifies as what I believe is referred to as a furry. Whenever I say, oh, hey, and start getting into a conversation, and I accidentally say the wrong pronoun. Because when I first meet someone, there's literally no way that I'm going to know what their pronoun is.
That's not identifying as a furry.
What?
That's not identifying as a furry.
You know what I mean. Quit it.
A furry is a hobby.
You know what I mean. There's a very good chance that the actual minutia of this concept I'm not going to get right. But you guys know what I'm trying to get at here. But like if Cass identifies as a furry, I keep almost saying Furby. Hey, let's do it that way. If you identify as a Furby. That's funnier actually. If you identify as a Furby, I don't know what the ding dong your pronouns would be if you identify as a Furby.
Ferb self.
You see what I mean here? So I would then go, is it possible I could just say you every single time? Because I'm never going to be able to, on the fly, remember how to do that. So insofar as gender identification, something like that, insofar as that goes, that can sometimes be confusing. But insofar as a relationship goes, which is what the Bible was talking about, it's not really that confusing. So I'm not sure why it says confusion until you keep in mind that God was very, very, very obsessed with the concept that the Israelites were supposed to basically just multiply and expand across the entire earth and conquer everything. And in order to do that, you had to reproduce. Yeah. So it's kind of hard to reproduce when the people who are attempting to reproduce don't have the anatomical equipment to produce offspring. So that is what I think the phrase "it is confusion" was referring to. It's not actually confusing, it just confuses what God was intending. But here's the problem with that. Remember, like I said earlier, all the Bible says is thou shalt not lie with mankind as with womankind. So extrapolating the concept that I am not allowed to be with someone in any way, shape, or form is not what the Bible said. The Bible only said thou shalt not lie with, physical relationship. So like, for example, let's take for example, if Cass and I were both biological men and we were dating. We did not, or we didn't, whatever you want to call it, have a physical relationship. By all technicalities, we have not committed a sin. And that's the problem that Christians have. They think that anything that connects to the queer spectrum is instantly a sin. Well, the Bible doesn't specify anything about gender identity, which apparently, correct? Am I correct in saying that gender identity falls within the queer spectrum? Okay, so the Bible doesn't specify anything about the gender identity side of the queer spectrum. I think it was because back then nobody would have ever thought of that, but I'm not entirely sure. But that means that Christians are dogmatic about a sin that isn't a sin until you go the extra step. So here's the issue that I have with it. I'm not trying to say point blank that I believe that Christians are sinning by thinking that a queer couple are instantly sinning by being queer in any way, shape, or form. Here's what I believe about it. The Bible's, and people on the queer spectrum bring this up a lot. And whenever I was raised in church, I believed this particular concept. But I realized that there's actually merit to the other side of the spectrum. So queer people will say the phrase, love thy neighbor as thyself. They don't usually quote the actual verse. They say, love. What's the phrase that people usually say? I'm spacing on how it's actually usually worded.
I don't know.
It's something about love. Christians are supposed to love everybody or something like that. I don't remember exactly how it's worded. Then some people will say, judge not that ye be not judged. Well, yes, the Bible says both of those. To me, it's love thy neighbor as thyself. That's the phrase that I was looking for. To me, those two are actually very applicable. Because if you loved your neighbor as yourself, you wouldn't want someone to walk up to you, or you wouldn't want everybody around you to look at you as though you're a plague. But people seem, especially Christians, seem to have it in their head that they are allowed to treat people around them like absolute garbage. Well, first of all, that means that you're judging, which, by the way, the word judge in that verse has the meaning of condemn, not judge. It means condemn in modern terminology. So if you treat or view a queer individual or a queer couple or a queer group or whatever as absolute garbage, mentally insane, which yes, has popped up before for me, mentally insane, mentally unstable, needing to go to a mental hospital, as garbage, as freaks, as blah, 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 blah. All these different things that people will frequently badmouth queer people as. If you call yourself a Christian, guess what that means you're guilty of? You're now the sinner. If the queer individual or the queer couple has not been together physically, and by the way, you have no way to know if they have, so you should not make a mental judgment, not condemnation, judgment about that, because you will never know. But if a Christian does condemn them for that, that means that the Christian is now the guilty one, not the queer individual or queer couple, because they have jumped to conclusions that they are not legally, socially, or, by the way, spiritually given a pass to jump to. So, long story short, what does the Bible, or should I say, maybe I should say summarization. What does the Bible say about the queer spectrum, about LGBTQ, whatever the ding-dong, the letters and numbers are supposed to be at the end of that I'm leaving off? The Bible says that a physical relationship is the sin. It does not specify anything beyond that. Christians who think it specifies something beyond that clearly do not know their Bible, and even if they do know their Bible, are basically saying that they are allowed to try to use God to rewrite reality around them. So they are both arrogant, they are sinners, and they are the problem, not the other way around. Now, if you've actually gotten this far in the video, which I'm assuming that most people who watch this are probably not going to get this far into the video, but if you have gotten this far into the video, please keep comments in the comment section respectful, because I know this is basically like, this video is almost rage bait. It's not intended to be, but it's kind of like rage bait. So please keep comments respectful. I'm not trying to belittle any Christian by this video. I'm simply trying to give you facts. If you guys have a preference as to which topic I cover next, please let me know. And I will see you in the next video, and happy trails.